Hey folks, welcome back to the shop. Frank here. I haven't done a shop update in a long time, and there have been so many changes in the shop over the past year that I thought I would just give everybody a rundown of the major additions and changes here in the shop. If you've been watching the channel consistently, you've seen a lot of the changes, but there's, I'm sure, a number of you who haven't been doing that. So I thought I would just bring everybody up to current situation in the shop. We'll walk around. I'm using the GoPro here. We'll walk around and I'll give you a little synopsis of each of the major changes and additions to the shop. So the last couple of videos I did were working on a mobile workbench to store 3 benchtop power tools, and that's over here in the corner. So this is the most recent change to the shop. Last video you saw was, if you watched last week, was installing the T-tracks in the top of this cabinet. And the cabinet holds the 3 benchtop power tools: the scroll saw, the oscillating drum sander, and the square chisel mortiser. So they fasten to the top with clamps. And of course the top has also become useful for assembly and setup. So I've got fences and stuff that I can clamp in the T-tracks, principally to build boxes or drawers. So you can create a right angle fence here, so you can make sure that your assembly is square, you know, flat and level. So that's the latest change to the shop. We'll just walk around counterclockwise here. So my plasma table, I haven't been doing a lot of plasma cutting for the past, I don't know, couple of months, but I've cleaned it out. I've removed all the slats. The slats are sacrificial, so they were pretty well melted, and I've got I had 4 slats left over. I've ordered the replacement slats, and they're just mild steel, 1/8" mild steel slats. Actually, I could cut my own probably. Maybe that's what most people do, but they're inexpensive enough to purchase. So as you can see, the plasma table, it's empty. I've cleaned out all the slag and debris that accumulates in it. It does have 2, for those of you that are thinking about a plasma table, I've changed the single, or the little drains that came with it into bar sink drains, and so they have good stoppers with gaskets. So it allows the water to drain pretty quickly, and it goes into this tank here, and then there's a pump on the tank. This is just a sprayer tank, a 20-gallon sprayer tank from Northern Tool or something like that, Tractor Supply, and it pumps the water back up into the table through this line here. And since the table comes in 2 pieces, there is a seam down the middle, which is about a 1/2 inch tall. So that causes you to, the table won't drain completely. That's why you need 2 drains. And so this has two outputs for what it's worth. Of course, once it fills up one side, it would overflow into the other side, and the level would equalize. But that's the way that's set up. And stuff underneath here, I have moved my chiller, refrigerated air dryer, under the plasma table. It was over in the corner before, and of course it's got my plasma torch, the chiller, and the desiccant dryer, my Evolution circular saw, and the storage tank, all that under the plasma table. One of the other changes I made this year was I moved my plate rack, my storage rack. It was over here where my cabinet is, my tool cabinet is. I had them switched places, but I found that I won't have to move this rack to load it or unload it, because the crane, little jib crane here, swings around, and I can pick a sheet out of the rack without having to move it around. Before, I had to roll the rack around in front of the crane. So that's a better arrangement, and also lets me roll up the door here I can roll this cabinet out of the way, which is a lot easier to roll than a rack full of metal. Weighs, sometimes over 1,000 pounds. And bring my sheets with the forklift and set them on the floor, pick them up and put them in the rack. So that's just a workflow change, which is, reduces my level of effort to move stuff around in here. No change on this cabinet. It's where all my plasma torch, plasma table, consumables, computers. There's some tools in the bottom. So that's what's in there. I did get a track saw this year. I'm kind of a latecomer to that game since I've been kind of focused on metalworking. Since I've been focused on metalworking for the most part over the past couple of years, I haven't really been much into the woodworking, back into woodworking. But over the past year, I have been doing a little more woodworking. So I went ahead and pulled the trigger on a track saw and a dust extractor. And I've used this dust extractor with my Porter cable sander as well, and it worked great. So I'm happy with this setup. I have to say that this is a very high quality tool. I bought the Festool. The price difference between this and the Milwaukee or the Makita, which were the other two highly rated track saws, was minimal. And with the Festool, I had assured interoperability and Bluetooth capability between the extractor and the saw, and it works great. I've shown it in use in the past couple videos, so if you're interested in how that works, you can go back through a couple of the videos building the tool workstation, the portable benchtop tool workstation, and just storage junk back here. So as you may remember, I bought a new lathe this year. This is a Precision Matthews 1440 GT, and I'm delighted with it. I think it's exceeded my expectations in terms of accuracy and quality. And there's several videos on the channel. If you go back a couple of months, 6 months, you'll see me unboxing and setting this up and leveling it and my first chips with it. I've been using it some on some side projects. The most recent one was the mast for the Mini Starlink, or the Starlink Mini, that I mounted a month or so ago on the boat. So it's hasn't seen a heavy amount of use over the past 6 months, but I'm just still building my skills in operating it, understanding the controls. It's totally different from my last lathe, which was an old South Bend, World War II South Bend tool room lathe, 10-inch tool room lathe. Over the past year, I've purchased half a dozen Craftsman tool chests, and I've got two here against the wall. My original plan was to put the lathe against the wall, but you need access to the rear of the lathe to get to the coolant sump. So I decided to switch things around. I can put these tool chests against the wall, have all my lathe tooling in this tool chest and various tools, and actually have some of my 3D printer spools of filament and stuff on in this chest right here. And I added some lighting over the workbench, which really helps. While I built the shop and I did all the electrical and installed all the light fixtures, well, in 2015, so almost 10 years ago. And I thought I had overwhelmed it in lighting, but while the lighting in here is certainly adequate, it's not as high intensity as you might need it to be. So I've added some task lighting, which is totally acceptable. So I've got task lighting here, and those are just shop lights from the local hardware store and wired into the switched outlet here. I did move my drill press over here. I don't use my drill press very much, but I did move it over here so it's in this kind of unused little space here. This is one of the doggies' beds. So I've also made changes. There's 3 major woodworking tools that I purchased over the past year. This is a saw stop, the professional cabinet saw with a 54-inch fence, and I retained my venerable unisaw, 3 horsepower unisaw. This is a 3 horsepower saw stop, and I've incorporated both of them into the same workbench, and there's a couple of videos on the channel that show how I did this, and it's turned out great. I am not using the unisaw much. I've used it for some dedicated ripping, which is how it's set up for. It's got a rip blade in it, and I have the blade guard installed on it, so that reduces the risk of injury on that saw. And over here, of course, the saw stop has a combination blade on it, used the majority of the time. I would say, 80-90% of the time I'm using the saw stop. Of course, it has the safety feature of the blade that retracts if it touches flesh or really any conductive material, and I'm happy with it. It is every bit as good a saw in terms of its, oh, here's Brutus. Brutus came in. It's every bit as good a saw, I believe, as this unisaw. Now this unisaw is like an 86 Rockwell, 1986 Rockwell unisaw. And when I got it about 25 years ago, had new bearings, put new bearings in the arbor, and it's been a wonderful saw. I would say this saw stop is every bit as good a saw as that unisaw. I'm very pleased with it. I've got the single fence that goes all the way across, and the only complaint I have about this setup, and now that I've been using it for a couple of months, is that the saw blade guard prevents the saw stop fence from moving all the way to the end of the track. But I don't have to do that very often. The downside is I have to undo a couple of half-inch bolts, one underneath the table for the riving knife or the back of the blade guard, and one here through the outfeed table where the blade guard bolts into the back of the trunnion so that it tilts with the blade. So that I've had to do that a couple times. It's not a big deal, but it does it does create a interference. Sometimes I think I should have taken this saw and put it on the other side, facing this way. And I've seen that's how some other people have set their saws up. You'll see some YouTube channels where they have 2 saws or even 3 saws in a table, and the saws face opposite directions. The problem I had is my jointer's over there, so I'd have to move that. It's on a mobile base, so it wouldn't be that big a deal, but I did spend the time setting it up like this. So I'll leave it this way for a while anyway, and I can always change it. The outfeed table here is separate from this outfeed table over here. There's a seam, which is where the 2 tables meet. I do have my router lift here, and I use the same fence for the router lift as I use for the saw. I did buy a second fence over here so that I could have it set up to do ripping on this saw without having to move the fence from the other side. So I doubled up on that. That's worked out fine. One of the earlier purchases last year was this Laguna 18BX bandsaw. This is a 3 horsepower bandsaw. I have replaced 2 bandsaws with this one. So I had a 3 horsepower Hitachi resaw and a Delta, 1 horsepower Delta 14-inch bandsaw in the shop. So I had two power tools. This one has replaced both of them. It has more capacity than my Hitachi resaw, which was a 12-inch resawing capability. I think this is 14 or 18-inch resaw capability. It's got a carbide blade in it right now. I don't do a whole lot of bandsawing in the type of scroll sawing, bandsawing. Mostly what I do with the bandsaw is ripping boards which are too warped, for example, to go through the table saw, risking a kickback or some other mishap. So I use the bandsaw for ripping lumber, maybe ripping off a crooked edge or something, following a line, sometimes resawing boards, more than I use it for scroll work. And of course it will take a narrower blade, and I've got narrower blades. This is 1.25" blade on here, and with carbide teeth. So this is the resawing blade, and it serves me most of the time. I have not put a smaller blade in that in the past year since I got this. I really like this saw too. I did quite a bit of research on the various 18-inch bandsaws or 3 horsepower bandsaws, and this one I like because the brake down here on the bottom turns the power off. When you hit that brake, it turns the power off and stops the blade. So while there's an emergency stop button here, it still coasts down if you hit that. That just cuts the power. The brake pedal cutting the power and stopping the blade is a very convenient feature. It's probably my favorite thing on this saw, and it differentiates it from a lot of the other similar saws on the market. Of course, this is my shaper. Used that a couple of weeks ago. My hydraulic press with the Swag off-road finger brake on it. I've used that in the past year. I did, over the past year, change my miter saw arrangement here, recessed it into the worktop, bench top, so that my boards can lay on the bench top, installed T-track with some stops, so I can make repeatable cuts on the miter saw. This is a Hitachi 12-inch sliding compound miter saw. I have had this saw for at least 10 years. I do like it a lot since it doesn't stick out in the back. It allows you to be close to the wall behind it, and it's been a good saw. This is the Jet JPJ 12 joiner planer, and I was looking at the Hammer and Felder joiner planers. This is a 12-inch, and I pulled the trigger on the Jet because it was, including shipping, it was a couple $1,000s less expensive, and it does have the spiral head, which is the first tool I've had with a spiral head, and so far I like it. My planer, my big 20-inch planer, Grizzly planer, has just got a regular straight knife cutting head, which works great. The spiral cutting head is a little quieter, and I've tested on some pretty gnarly grain, and it doesn't tear out as much. I have tested this planer function, and of course this is a planer and joiner, and you can flip the table up and turn it into a planer, 12-inch planer. I don't use it as a planer because I've got my 20-inch planer here, but it does a great job. I have run some boards through it, testing them, and there's no snipe, so that's really helpful. It is on a mobile base. I do have my IVAC Pro blast gate on here, and there's a video on the channel where I installed these blast gates on the power tools, and they are remote controlled. When you turn the power tool on, they open the blast gate and turn on the dust extractor, the dust collector, which is actually upstairs now. I moved it upstairs. Since most of the tools go into a cyclone bin before they go upstairs, the bag in the dust collector upstairs doesn't fill up that quickly, and the planer does the same thing. So it's not a hassle having it upstairs, since I don't have to empty it very often. Anyway, the tools here all have these IVAC blast gates on them, and since I moved my other bandsaw out, it freed one up for the sander here. And of course, this is a Performax 16 open-ended drum sander, but it's sitting on top of my planer just to save floor space. So it has a blast gate as well. The only unusual thing about the blast gate arrangement I have here is installed a 6-inch with a 5-inch adapter here for the cyclone barrel for the output from the planer. So that reduces the need to go upstairs and empty the dust collector. Vast majority of the chips go into this barrel, and I can take it outside and dump it very easily. The lid just is sitting on there. Another one of my changes this past year is I got rid of a workbench to make more floor space, and I wound up buying 2 of these collapsible workbenches. These are Keter or Keter, and they collapse. I'll show you one. I bought 2 of them. The other one's over here. They fold up. Right here's one. So folds up into a pretty compact package, stores out of the way. And I've set those up for when I need to assemble something, and I've used them on a couple of the past projects this summer. I actually used them building the storage cabinet we first looked at. So those are helpful. They're convenient, and they close up. They open and close easily. They're not the most rigid, but they certainly are adequate for project assembly and that sort of thing. So I'm happy with that purchase. This tool case I bought, this toolbox I bought, one of the first ones of the group purchase, and it's got all my woodworking tools, chisels and knives and planes and measuring tools and everything in it. So that's like my woodworking. That's my lathe. That's miscellaneous over there. Anyway, so that's helpful. I like these Craftsman tool chests. They're reasonably priced. They put them on sale. I did go look at Harbor Freight, the general line. They didn't have enough in stock. I have a Lowe's Pro credit card, and so that gives me 5% off stuff I purchase at Lowe's. So when these go on sale, I get another 5% off on them, and with that credit card, they deliver to the house for $20. And if I don't feel like running down to the local Lowe's to me is about 40 miles away, closest Lowe's to me. This summer I bought this Bamboo Lab A1 open-sided 3D printer. I've used it for some projects recently. This summer I printed a bunch of storage bins, these plastic storage bins. I don't know, I printed half a dozen of them. And it works great. It does have a couple features. My old 3D printer, which I really haven't had one for 3 or 4 years since it busted. It broke, and I haven't replaced it till just recently. It does have a camera in it, so you can remotely watch the work, or you can select time lapse when you tell it to print something, and it will time lapse. I did print one thing, and I've been getting things off Thingiverse. This is a little toolbox that I printed. This is PLA. I've got cotter pins in these hinges. I really need to go get some very small screws long enough to fit in these hinges, but which is the way it was intended. But anyway, just some test prints. I'm delighted with the output of this Bamboo Lab printer. My previous printer had a 4-inch cube envelope. This is a 10-inch cube printing envelope, so much more practical for shop organization projects and that sort of thing. It does have the ability to handle 4 different filaments, and it will change colors while it's printing. So you can mount a rack which holds 4 spools of filament and run the 4 spools into the 4 connections here. And so that is one capability this one has, though it is a bed slinger, which, you know, has pros and cons to it as well. It has a nice digital display, and the interface here is very intuitive. So I really like this printer. I did not get an enclosed one because of the size, the volume, and I don't print exotic materials. At least I haven't printed exotic materials. Most of my use is utilitarian or prototyping. So PLA or PETG, you know, works fine. This, I think you need to do a really good job with some of the exotic filaments, the glass fiber reinforced or ABS. You need an enclosure for better environmental control, temperature control, I believe. So happy with that. So a significant project a couple of months ago was building this new lumber rack on the wall. It's structural steel tubing, and it's a cantilevered rack. So all the arms are welded to the vertical uprights, which are lagged into the studs in the wall. And the purpose for building this rack was to get basically all the lumber, which is on this level here, which from the side you can see is, you know, a good bit of lumber, 300 or 400 board feet anyway. And it was on the floor. And my previous rack, you know, held the rest of this lumber. Now this is all cherry and walnut. I mean, this is cherry. Back there, some cherry. Walnut up here, the thicker boards. This is all walnut. Next level's all cherry. Some miscellaneous stuff on the top shelf. I've had this lumber for, it's left over from a huge purchase about 20 years ago. I air dried it in my barn, my previous residence, and moved it here 10 years ago. It's been sitting inside this building, which is heated and air conditioned, for 10 years. So it is very dry, and it's perfect for furniture making. So that's my lumber rack. Now, by getting it up off the floor, I freed up a bunch of space underneath it. And a project a couple of months ago was building this scrap bin for metal scraps. I got another toolbox, and in here I've got all my metalworking tools, welding, TIG, MIG welding, clamping, grinders, bandsaw. So this is my metalworking supplies cabinet, bandsaw blades for the... So that slides right underneath there, and all the floor space I had lost with this pile of lumber on the floor is regained by leaving, I have 42 inches under the bottom of this arm. So got the workbench in there, and I'm using these little furniture dollies for stuff, and I can roll them around so my wood scrap bins fit under there. And this little cart here has my rotary tables for the mill are on there. So I need to roll that around so I can move them over to the mill. Got some drill bits and stuff in there that I don't use very often, and a lot of owner's manuals in that. So that's out of the way as well. I'm not sure what I'm going to ultimately do here. I may wind up getting another tool cabinet like this one and putting it here in place of where I have those scrap bins. I'm not sure. You always find a use for small scraps of wood. I'm always looking for something to, for a small piece of wood. So I hate to throw reasonable sized pieces of lumber away. I'm kind of a hoarder of that, and you can see I've got little short pieces piled on here as well. So, you never know when you need a little piece of wood. I did move my belt disc sander over here up against the wall. It's been in a couple different places in the shop over the past 10 years. I use it mostly for metalworking, to be honest with you. So I've moved it over here to where I do most of my metalworking. My grizzly mitering bandsaw is of course here too, and it rolls out so I can pull it out a little bit. I did a review of this a couple of years ago when I first got it, and I was not thrilled with it. I will tell you that I'm happier with it now that I've used it for a couple of years. It works okay. Now, the best thing about it is it miters. In other words, the cutting head, the saw is on pivots, so you can cut angles without having to send the stock off at an angle. You can keep the stock lengthwise, which is what I have here. I can pull it out and I can have a roller stand here I can set up, and I can cut long pieces by just pivoting at an angle, mitering them, for example, just by pivoting the saw. So I like that feature, and that's one of the reasons I spent the extra money to buy this saw versus every other nearly identical metal cutting bandsaw, imported metal cutting bandsaw on the market. So I'm happy with it, and I tell you, the thing that made change my mind was good blades. I ordered Lennox blades from, I think, Bandsaw Blades Direct or something. Discount bandsaw blades, I'm not sure. Let me tell you. And I have some of the blades here, I think. Let's see. Here it is. You can read this. BandsawBladesDirect.com. These are Lennox. This is a Die Master 2, 5 feet 4 inches long. So that's 64-inch blade, half-inch wide, and it's 14/18 teeth per inch. And this blade, this is a Lennox Die Master 2. These blades are incredible. They last a year. Now, I mean, I'm not doing production work, clearly, but I am using it on a regular basis, and there are periods where I'm using it, repeatedly. This is one of the blades that came with the Grizzly, and it's junk. I bought extra blades from Grizzly when I bought the saw. Don't do that. Go and get some name brand blades. Here's another Lennox. So I've got, 3 of the Lennox blades here and a couple of the carbon steel blades from Grizzly, which I will never use. They're junk. So the key to enjoying your working with a inexpensive import bandsaw, which for the home or small or hobby shop, they're perfectly appropriate, is getting good blades. It makes a world of difference. I did move my mechanics tool chest over here in the corner and got rid of my parts washer. I had a parts washer, just a Harbor Freight parts washer, here in the corner. I haven't used it in 3 years. I was using it when I was rebuilding the Cub Cadet engines in a lot of my tractors, and very occasionally. So I've moved it upstairs, I've emptied it, cleaned it up, put it upstairs rather than give it away. I may need it at some point. I can always bring it back down. It's lightweight, it's thin sheet metal. I saved the 5 gallons of mineral spirits that were in it. And I'm, considering moving to a different type of parts washer that doesn't use the flammable mineral spirits as the cleaning fluid. Some of them come with there's dedicated cleaning fluids for part washers, but I don't use it often enough to justify the floor space, at least at this point in my list of projects. So that's what I've done here, consolidated these things. So that covers most of the changes in the shop, except that the workbench that used to be here in the middle of the floor is now here. I've got my sheet goods rack with plywood, sheets of plywood in it here. It's on rollers. There's a video on the channel a month or so ago, 6 weeks ago, where I built this rack, and it fits perfectly there. I can load it, open the roll-up door, load it from that end, and pull the sheets out of this end to use them. And so this is my old workbench had for decades. I think it was probably originally a workbench in a food shop, a kitchen or something. It has this huge thick maple top and heavy steel legs. It's heavy and rigid, and of course I have this cabinet underneath it full of my sanding and finishing supplies. So that's what I've moved over here, is sanders. I got my biscuit joiner sanding supplies in here, and so this workbench, I'm not sure I'm going to keep this metal vise on this corner. I did move my woodworking vise from the other side of the bench to here, so I've got that there. This one, it's in a convenient spot, so I may just leave it. There's my brew, my butchie. There's my butchie boy. There's my butchie boy. Where's my brew? Where'd brew go? Why is it always you in here and brew's always outside? Where'd brew go? Brew, come here. What you doing, huh? What you doing? You being a good boy? How come you're sitting outside? It's getting hot out there. It's hot out there. This is the end of August, and these guys have pretty much been chilling in the shop most of the summer. We've had some warm weather. We've also had some cool weather. Last week was pretty cool. So they're doing fine. They turned 8 this year, and they're both nice, healthy dogs. Good boys. My good boys. Good boys. All right, folks, that's going to wrap this little recap of the past year, kind of a year. Year in review. Thanks for watching. We'll see you guys on the next one.